What's up guys, welcome to my latest video. I will be doing an oil painting portrait of the late Chris Cornell, lead singer for Soundgarden and Audioslave. I start off painting the basic neutral colors to establish the foundation for the rest of the painting like I always do. I use a very pale version of burnt umber, which I add some titanium white and a small amount of yellow for all those grainy wooden backgrounds that I would eventually elaborate on. The most difficult part about this painting was that not only I had to paint a portrait, but the entire person and the background, which was integrated into the rest of the figure. This created some complexities because I had to do some measuring with the wooden framework that I had to lay out in this painting, and which Chris Cornell was sitting on, and the shadows and light that were heavily integrated into this picture. I lay out the blocking process in this first stage of painting, making sure I fill in all the areas with the coloring before I move on to the next stages of the painting. I create this baseline as a firm foundation on which I will have to elaborate in the next stages. This painting has a lot of warm colors to it, and so I use a lot of yellow and a small amount of red that I integrated into many of the colors, including the colors for the portrait. The wooden background also has a hint of green in it as well, and so my mixture for the background colors included burnt umber, a small amount of green, cadmium yellow, and occasionally would add a small amount of red to maintain a variety in the painting. So here's the colors that I'll be using for the portrait. I'm using a flesh tone, burnt umber, the cadmium yellow, the cadmium red, and some titanium white. So what I do with these colors is that I mix them interchangeably. I don't stick with one color because it's going to look way too bland and way too plain. What I do is I integrate a lot of that cadmium yellow and some of that burnt umber into that flesh tone in order to create variety in the flesh colors. Otherwise, it's going to look way too monotone, and it's going to take away from the realism. So I use a lot of white, a lot of the yellow, and if I want to have more variety with my shadows, I integrate that burnt umber into it. Okay, so in this part you can see that I have established a 4x4 grid inside the square, which I'll be doing the portrait. Like I said before, it's a complex portrait because it's so small. The actual face is going to be inside this block. It's a 4x6 inch block, and so I have to use a lot of razor sharp precision to get to the details that I want from the photograph. So over here I'm outlining the edges of where the hair meets the face, and you can see that I'm drawing out that contour right there with that burnt umber combined with the yellow, which right now it's not that important to be precise because right now I'm still laying out the foundational colors, the whole blocking in process. So right now I'm just establishing some darks and eventually some lights on the face, and it's just gonna be a lot of plain and simple colors right now, nothing too complex yet. So right now, in those gaps of time where I'm not actually painting on the canvas, I'm looking at the reference photograph a lot, like immensely, just doing a lot of measuring. And I'm actually gonna leave a video in the description below talking about measuring and how to measure properly. It's that video where I talk about how a lot of artists struggle with detail. So I'll leave that in a link below. So right now I'm putting in the lines of where the rest of the details are going to be, like the eyes, the nose, the contours, the mouth, and the facial hair. So right now, nothing too complex, obviously, as you can see, just a lot of outlines. The colors are still not that important right now because I'm still blocking in. So that's the other thing to remember, is that when you're blocking in, when you're establishing all those main building blocks of the painting, just any color will basically do, just as long as you get the main idea of where everything is going to be. So right now I'm measuring a lot from the reference photograph onto the canvas, onto that grid, making sure everything is lined up correctly. And so as I keep painting, as I keep going along, that's when I start the process of narrowing down on where everything's going to be. And as you can see, I'm painting over the lines of that grid, but I make sure that it's critical that I keep those dots in between. Those dots are going to be the main parts of where I reference. That's like the remnant of that the reference grid. So still lots of measuring, lots of referring to that reference photograph. And so I would say that this is the most difficult part of the painting because you're doing a lot of measuring, a lot of estimation. So it's like you're going up this hill, and it's an uphill battle to figure out what you're going to be looking at, what you're going to be integrating on here. So right now is the time where you're going to start establishing the colors, the variety of colors, like I have demonstrated just before on that palette sheet of paper where I established those 5 colors. So this is the part where you're going to have some of that variation come in. This is why it's so difficult right now, this difficult stage, because not only are you measuring where everything's going to be, not only are you measuring where the contour lines and where the edges are going to be of everything, you're going to be beginning to lay out the variety of colors on there. So it's just going to be, it's very messy. It just looks very messy. And this is the part where it gets very discouraging because it just looks so sloppy. It just looks like something that you don't want to present to anybody. So that's why me personally, I don't really like to show my paintings to anybody until they're actually done, because it's difficult to kind of to look at. But you just have to be patient in this part of the painting process, because you got to realize that it's going to come out better at the very end. So you got to trust yourself on that part. But anyways, this is the part where I'm integrating some more yellows, some more reds. I'm balancing out the browns more. I'm gonna begin blending the edges more. I'm also estimating where those smaller shadows are going to be, because the shadows on the face, and especially on a small portrait like this, they're going to be very, very versatile. Some parts are going to be darker than the other ones, and so it's like you got to reconcile the various values of the shades. Yeah, the values. So pay attention to where the values are going to be. And if you need more crutches, get what's it called, a value grid. Like you paint some colors onto a little piece of paper, and you match the colors from your painting onto the reference photograph, just to make sure that they match on there properly. Me personally, I don't do that, because I trust my instincts more, because that's what I do when I paint. I have a lot of intuition. But some people, they use that. It's like the color wheel, so I guess you could use that as well. Okay, so now you can see that I'm adding some more reds, a little bit more of those pinkish flesh tones from that base color that I showed earlier. So what I'm doing there, I'm laying them out right now, and then at a later time I'll be blending the edges together. So it's like I'm kind of doing multiple things at once at this point. Like I'm laying out the foundational blocking colors, and I'm also blending some of these edges together. But don't worry about finishing everything at one time. Like, that's the thing with painting a portrait, especially with this face, is that I took a break every now and then to paint another part of the painting, which was much easier. Like, I painted some of the background parts, like those grainy wooden textures. I painted like the other part of the figure, just to take a little break from painting the portrait, which was definitely the most difficult part. So it's always good to take a break and then come back with a fresh mind, just a fresh eye, because I think if you stay in one place for way too long, especially when you're painting a face, painting a portrait, your eyes might start playing tricks on you, and you got to take a break from that. Otherwise, you're gonna probably do some overkill with certain things, where you're gonna mess up, make it look sloppy in some areas, because you're gonna have your eyes play tricks on you. You're not gonna be able to integrate the colors properly. And so now it's like I'm starting to go into like the more complex parts of the painting. You can see that I established some of the light variations on there, some of the values on there I started to establish. So now I'm blending the hair edges onto where it meets the face. So now I'm blending more and more. I'm blending the shadows of the nose where they have the outline. I don't want to call it a contour, because the painting the nose, I mean, traditionally it's been a very difficult part for many artists to paint, especially for beginners. They complain a lot about how they have trouble painting the nose. Well, painting the nose, the shadow colors, they gotta be very light, because the shadows are gonna be very subtle, especially when the light source is coming from close to the front of the face, where it's not directly coming from like the left or the right. Like in this photograph, in this painting, the light source is coming from slightly from the left, from the front, and so the light's gonna be very subtle, and it's gonna thus have those very light parts that you gotta integrate on there. So you can see that I'm having a little bit of yellow mixed in together with some white, some burnt umber, and even with that part, I make the effort and take the time to integrate a little variation of other colors, a little bit more flesh tones here and there, and I sprinkle in some red occasionally just to add variety. And that's going to be the most important part, is to have that variety, to really get that realism on there, get that realism aspect on there, to get that variety of color on there. And so now, as you can see, I took a break from painting the face. You can kind of get the main idea of that. It looks like that photograph on there to the left that I hung up there. And by the way, if you're doing a reference photograph for your painting, it's always a good idea to hang it up there, just tape it up there, so that way you don't have to pick it up from constantly. So now you can see that I zoomed in on this part because I thought that this would be another important part to integrate, to kind of go in depth on this this comprehensive video that I'm trying to make for you guys. So you can see that I'm making the shadow of the wife beater that he's wearing. I don't use a lot of gray. I don't use gray as a predominant color for the shadows on there because it looks way too flat from my experience. So I use a little bit of blue, some of that French ultramarine blue, which I mixed in with a very small amount of red. I don't know if you could see the red on there, but it's very subtle because the red, it's gonna create that warmer color. Because like I said earlier, this painting has a lot of warm colors to it, and so I'm trying to keep it consistent as much as possible. So I'm integrating a very small amount of red, and I also blended in a very small amount of gray to keep that color more neutral, more grounded, more baseline. Otherwise, it's going to come out way too bold and way too vivid, and that's what you don't want to do, especially in these still pretty early stages of the painting. Okay, so now at this point, I'm starting to add the shadows on there, those wrinkles on the shirt. So what I do is, first off, just like the rest of the painting, I add the main block colors. So I guess I'm blocking in, but at a smaller, more micro scale. I add some horizontal lines on there with some little bit of curvature in order to establish where the shadows are going to be. And then afterwards, I blend the edges together. So also take note that I'm doing this all in one session, so the colors are still going to be wet regardless. So that way it's going to be a lot easier for me to blend the edges together. So I don't directly go over those lines, but what I do is I go on the edges of the lines and I just blend them together with the rest of the established colors. So that way the transition will be a lot more seamless. It'll be a lot easier that way. And I just use a darker version of what I already used earlier. I just use some French ultramarine blue, a little bit of red, and a little bit of gray, just to keep that color grounded and more neutral. And so now over here, you could also see me blending the edges together with where the jeans, the edges of the jeans, they meet the white of the shirt. See, again, like I'm very carefully and methodically blending together the edges, so that way the transition will be a lot more seamless. Because otherwise, if you have very sharp edges on there, it's just gonna look fake, artificial, and just very flat. So that's what you want to avoid if you're painting realism. So here I am going over again the wrinkles on the shirt just to make sure that I have everything laid out together, integrated perfectly together. I use white, but I try to avoid using white directly, because if you have too much white, it's just going to come off way too strongly. So keep that white grounded also. Like I would never use a paint color directly from the tube. I always find a way to mix it and integrate it together with the other colors established on the canvas. Alright, so now you can see that a lot of the painting has been already established. Not much else really describe, to be honest, because a lot of it is just describing the way you mix the colors on there, the way you establish the mixing with the blending the edges together and laying out the foundational colors, the whole blocking in. And I think that was the part that I really needed to explain and describe. But now you're just looking at me finishing off the details and giving it that finalizing touch. So I'm just going over everything and elaborating on the smaller parts. And also, most importantly, I'm not relying that much on the grid anymore. Those dots you see on there, I'm gonna pretty soon get rid of them, just paint over them, because I established all the measurements on there as it is. And so now it's just a matter of me being patient and pushing through and finalizing everything and making sure everything is matched up to the reference photo as best as possible. Finishing up any textures I need to do on the wooden background and the guitar case, as well as any minor errors I might have done, and finishing off the portrait. So at this point, I hope that you guys learned something from this video, and if you did, please make sure to hit that like button, as it'll help a lot with the algorithms of this video being posted. So subscribe to my channel and enjoy the rest of this video.